Welcome to the Creator's Adventure, where we interview creators from around the world, hearing their stories about growing a business. Can creating every day change your business and your life? Today, I'm talking with Mike Brennan about how to build consistency into your business and creative process and the power of community. My name is Brian McAnulty. I'm the founder of Heights Platform. Let's get into the show. Hey everyone, we're here with Mike Brennan. He is a designer and illustrator. He is mostly known for his pop culture art, yoga art, live event sketching, and graphic design. Mike helps fellow creatives leverage simple, practical steps for establishing a daily creative habit. He does this via international public speaking, the Daily Creative Habit community and newsletter, the Creative Chats podcast, and his course, Your Artist Journey, where he shares his key methods and principles from his own daily art making practice that spans 10 plus consecutive years and counting. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Brian. It's my pleasure to be here.
So, Mike, my first question for you is, what would you say is the biggest thing that you did or that you are doing that has helped you achieve the freedom to do the things that you enjoy?
Yeah, I think bottom line is a daily creative habit. I mean, I know I talk about that. You said that, obviously I have a community and a newsletter and things, and that's kind of the name that I put everything under. But really, that truly is what has made all the difference in my life, is showing up every day and doing some creative act, giving myself the place to explore, to play, to break some things sometimes, to just be curious outside of the constraints of either clients or committees or other budgets and things like that. I think everybody needs a place where it's safe for them to show up and ask those questions and probe deeper, because in that place is where you start to form some things and figure some things out that you can build on. And if you never set yourself up with a place like that, you are always going to be responsive in your creativity to whatever the demands are around you. And so getting to know yourself better, getting to know your voice, your style, what it is that you just want to do, what you're passionate about, giving yourself a place to play and experiment and figure some of those things out has hands down been the most valuable thing in my entire life so far.
Wow, that's awesome. I like that. I think for me personally, what's helped me in the same kind of idea of being creative is I kind of look at it as like stages. Like sometimes there's this work that you really need to focus on, but it's important to be able to step away from that and then go and do something creative, even if it's completely different from that work and not even related.
Yep.
And those periods, I feel like that's what helps you grow as a person, as a creative. And then when you're doing more work later, you can bring that to it, rather than, as it sounds like you're kind of saying,
Absolutely.
Like if you get stuck in the work, you're just kind of doing the same thing. It's hard to grow.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And like you said, when you do those things that seemingly have no connection, I mean, we're a connected person, right? We don't have things that are just siloed. And so when you do something that's maybe more of a passion project that's for you personally, that's going to bleed over to the stuff that you do professionally. And it may be something that's just an idea that sparks something that you're like, oh, let me explore this now in my client work or whatever. And you would never get to that point had you not had this place to be able to, again, have the ability to be curious and explore, Yeah,
exactly. All right. So give us a little bit of background. You went from a 10-year art absence to creating almost every day. So what helped you come back to creating, and like, how did you figure out to start this daily habit?
It was really through necessity. I had gone to art school in New York City and went the traditional route of, okay, you go to art school, you graduate, you get a job in the field. And I worked in advertising agencies, I worked in magazines. Every so often I would bounce around to a new place because of either trying to kind of climb to the next thing, or there were staff changes, or whatever the reasons, right? You just move around, you get a little restless. And eventually I got to this place where I felt like I had hit a ceiling for a long time, and there were deadlines that were happening every 2 weeks. And I enjoyed the people I was working with and the work I was doing, but there was also this part of me that was like, I feel like I'm part of the machine. I feel like I'm not really enjoying what I just did, and I'm onto something else. And it just, I go, is this it? Because this shouldn't feel like it should be it. And yet I don't know what else to do. And so through a series of other events in my life, and another area of interest, I ended up leaving design for a while and switching careers, and I moved, and a whole bunch of other life events, like I said. And that led me on a path where I wasn't creating. I wasn't showing up and doing that work that I had always done in my life. And there were other responsibilities that I had, and trying to be a little bit more practical, right? That's always the war of like creativity and practicality. Sometimes we have to try to do that dance. And then it was, unfortunately, life led to this place where I was operating in some roles that were really not in my gifting, and some other life circumstances. But I fell into a deep depression, and then just hit this point in life where it just became rock bottom. I had to leave the career that I was in at that point, had to move. My dad had been diagnosed with cancer and died quickly, just like thing after thing after thing.
Wow.
And I found myself just in this place of like going, I don't even know what to do. Like, I feel lost. I feel like how did life become this? I'm sitting in the midst of this mess and this pain, and I barely have enough effort to show up each day and maybe journal something to try to get my feelings out, or figure out what's going on with me, even internally. And it was through sitting with that I started to think about, I remember creating things when it used to bring me joy. Like when I was a kid, I would do these greeting cards for family members, and they were like cartoon characters of, things that were happening in my world, right? And I would make these cards and give it to the people, and their faces would light up. And they'd be like, you created this for me? That's awesome. Thank you so much. And I knew intuitively, like, there's a connection that happened here. I created something, I gave it to somebody else, and I had an impact on their life. I love that. I want more of that. Now, obviously, when you're a kid, you're not thinking that, right? You're just having fun.
Yeah.
But that stayed with me. And all of a sudden now I'm in this place where I'm like, well, I'm not thinking about anybody else because I'm in pain. I'm in depression, and I need to get help. And so, yes, I sought professional help with therapy and was working through some other things, and eventually came to this place where I was like, I need to come back to my own art because it brought me joy. Is that even possible? And so I decided to just get a sketchbook, and I went down to my local Starbucks, and I had a pen, and I sketched this Starbucks coffee cup. And it was like 5 minutes. It was all that I could muster. And I looked at it, and I was highly embarrassed. And I was thinking to myself, oh man, I really hope nobody's looking over my shoulder right now and knows that I went to art school, because they'd be like, dude, what happened? Like, this is what you can produce now, but I had to give myself grace in that moment, because it was all that I could muster. It was where I was in life, and I couldn't measure myself backwards to who I was at another point when I was healthier and more creative and in the flow. It had been 10 years since I'd really done much of anything. And I'm like, it's me trying to learn again, trying to get back in touch with that place and figure out, can I get back in touch with that place? And so I decided to put day one at the top of this page, close the book, and said, I'm going to show up for day two. And I had been turned on to this idea of a 365-day art making journey. And it sounded really intimidating to me, I'll be honest, because I thought to myself, well, I have not showed up for 10 years. Can I show up for an entire year every single day? I don't know. That sounds kind of like a tall order. Because even in the height of my creativity, there weren't things that I had as a daily practice that kept me engaged every single day. I would go in fits and spurts, right? You'd have a block of time, and you're like, hey, I want to create on the weekend, or I want to do this or that, and you would kind of go with the flow. And so this was very different for me. And I figured out, well, if I break things down into small categories, if I do 7 days and think about only that 7 days, and what am I going to draw in that 7 days? What's the subject matter? What materials am I going to use? Trying to really figure out, how can I break this down into small blocks and then just keep building? And so I did that, came to the end of a year and said, wow, I actually did this. I showed up every single day for a year, and then said, now what? Right? Because that's the natural next question. And I said, I don't think I'm done yet. And so I'm like, okay, let's lean into this. Let's figure out some more parameters around these things, and keep playing, keep experimenting. And so I continued to do that and then reached the end of that year and then the following year. And I kept showing up for it because I kept feeling like there is more for me to discover, not only about the process that I'm engaged with creativity, but really more about myself. Like figuring out, oh, this is my voice. This is my style. Oh, you know what? I like messy things. And when I was in art school and we had to render things very tightly and like the photorealism thing, I convinced myself I wasn't a real artist because I couldn't do photorealism. And yet I knew that there were tons of other artists who didn't do photorealism, but for whatever reason, that was the benchmark. And so I had to unpack some of those lies. And in this process, it allowed me to go, this is who I am and this is how I need to show up. And I have to stop trying to fit into the mold of something else that somebody gave me along the way. And in order to do that, I had to unpack things, and this gave me a place to unpack things. So I continued to do that, and this past April was 10 years that I surpassed of doing every single day something. And that has morphed and changed over the years as far as themes and as far as mediums that I've used. But I figured out a few things along the way of going, oh, you know what, this journey isn't just for me. I believe it's for other creative people. Because the things that I've learned on this and the keys, the steps I figured out, I want to help other creative people who either maybe want to come back or maybe want to start, or maybe they're in a creative field where they're leveraging their creativity for everybody else, but they're like, I come home and I want to do something for me, but I have no energy or effort because I've been creating all day long. And they repeat that cycle over and over again. They're frustrated, you know? So that's what led me to all the things that I do today and figuring out a lot along the way of going, do I want to do this type of art? Do I want to tackle this kind of subject matter? Do I want to use these materials? Where does graphic design fit into the mix of all this stuff? Did I just leave that behind, or am I bringing that forward now and introducing some of the illustration with that? And so that gave me the ability to ask questions, be curious, and think about possibilities instead of the limits. And I think when you get in that mindset of asking yourself enough questions and thinking about what does this make possible, then you set yourself up for success because you're constantly engaging with yourself and the process, you know?
Yeah, I like that. I like the idea of thinking about the possibilities instead of the limits. I think in certain creative fields, it actually gets harder to continue to think about the possibilities as you get further into the field. The example that's coming to my mind specifically is software development, because I feel that it's common for a lot of people who work in software development to think about what they know that they can do rather than what's possible. And so oftentimes it's easier to ask somebody who has no clue about the field, no clue about what's possible, what would you want it to be? And they may say something to you that at the first moment that you hear it, you think, well, that might be really difficult. I don't know how to do that. But when you think about it a little bit more, then you realize, oh, well, actually, this could happen. But it's actually, in some ways, easier to get that information from somebody whose mind is less worried about constraints and potential problems. And so I think that's a skill that takes effort to maintain as you grow. But I like what you said in the beginning about taking the idea of doing something daily and then breaking it down into the smaller steps to make it less overwhelming. Because I feel for someone like who was in your position, who hadn't been doing anything, to say that you're going to do something even the second or third day already can feel overwhelming. And it really is an exercise that you have to build up. And the more you do it, the easier it kind of becomes. But I agree that it's important to figure out how can you break it down into a small enough step that you can actually progress. So with that said, where do you get the inspiration for the illustrations that you would make?
If it's more of the personal passion projects, it really came from what I was interested in. So if I was watching a movie or a certain TV show, like I love pop culture. I've grown up with that all my life. And so I would do my own versions of things because it was what was current in my life at the moment. And I'm like, okay, creating this art around these characters or this theme allows me to have a connection with somebody who's also a fan of that. And so that would inspire me to do that. Sometimes it was whatever was going on in my day event wise. So if I was out someplace and I was trying to utilize my time well, and maybe it was some event where I'm sitting, I'm a spectator, I would take a sketchbook with me and I would sketch something that was happening at the event. And this was the event through my eyes. And eventually that actually led to part of a service too, where I live sketch events. And so it's storytelling, right? It's just, here's what's happening in this moment, and here it's being captured through the way that I see things, and then also the way that I illustrate things. And so I just kept being curious, right? I kept including my world instead of trying to find like, oh, well, what's hot and popular and trendy, and what would sell well, and all those other things. I was more concerned with what's important to me, and how can I start to elevate that, and then figure out how to connect with other people who find that also interesting and important,
Got it. In the beginning, were you thinking like at all, like how could I turn this into a business, or was it purely just like the exercise?
Yeah, it was really more about my own health, right? It was about mental health. It was about me figuring out, can I come back to this place where I'm actually doing something that I love, that I loved once and I can love again? Is that possible? And then from there, it was, okay, I'm doing a lot of bad work. I'm not feeling great about that, but realizing you have to do a lot of bad work before you get to the good work. And it being something that evolved. And so as I started to figure out like, oh, I really enjoy doing this type of illustration or art, these themes, then going, well, I see people selling prints. I see people uploading things to print on demand shops. I see people doing all these other things. What if I started to do those things because I've already created the art? Now, what else can I do with it? Right. So it was kind of a natural progression that happened from the interest to then going, I want there to be a connection with people. And obviously, if there's going to be a connection with people, they need to find it somehow. They need to see it someplace. And if they want to purchase it, they need a way to be able to do that. And so it wasn't necessarily in my mind thinking like this is going to be part of my career or side gig hustle thing. It was really just more organic. And the more that I fell in love with some things, the more that I wanted to do it naturally, the more I would try to find avenues to get it out before people.
Got it. So aside from creating art for yourselves, you help other creatives and aspiring artists with your online course, your community, coaching sessions, and even a podcast. I want to talk a little bit about the course and then the community. So since our audience is composed of a lot of online course creators, you have this course, Your Artist Journey. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what it does to help your students?
Yeah, so when I created this course, it was really, again, me identifying some steps along my own journey and going, I think this is really helpful for some other people. And when I created the course, it was really with visual artists in mind because that was my background. Since then, it's really been broadened to encompass more creative expressions because I really believe that there are threads that regardless of whatever it is that you make, the part of the process can be the same, or part of the idea generation can be the same. It's how you show up. Those things are a little bit more universal.
Yep.
And then you kind of apply your own specific creativity and whatever genre that looks like. But in the course, I outline, here's what my journey has looked like in a little bit more detail. And here are some steps that I've established along the way and I think are helpful for other creative people. And then I also, towards the end of it, give a peek inside of my sketchbook from the early days of like what I just told you about how I was showing up and doing these things. And some of it, I'm very open and honest about it. I say some of the stuff is not great, right? And usually we want to hide that stuff. Usually we want the highlight reel on everything. But I said, I think it's important that people understand that you have to have days where you're doing bad work to get to the good work. And it's normal. It's natural. It's not natural to think every time I sit down, I'm going to hit a home run. Like that's, lightning in a bottle, and maybe people who are really like part of the 1% of creativity that they just have something that's like completely genius level. But for the rest of us, we have to do work, right? We have to show up. We have to fail, and we have to figure some things out along the way. And so I really try and be open and honest with that whole part of the process as well. Also sharing some tools and some things that I've used. Again, trying to be as transparent as I can be about my own journey. And then as far as the community that I have now and Daily Creative Habit, that I have broadened it out, like I said, to include really more types of creative people. And I really believe that, honestly, we're all creative. I think I have many conversations with people where they're like, I can't draw a stick figure, I can't play an instrument, right? They go to the obvious expressions of creativity, the arts, if you will. But I'm like, you know what? We all are creative because sometimes we just have to look at how we prepare a meal, or how we balance a budget, or how we set up systems, or how we create certain content. I think really we need to broaden our definition of what creativity is so that we can fully embrace that and not think to ourselves, well, that's not me, right? And I think as we start to do that, we'll figure out how to show up even better for ourselves and the people around us, right? We'll take more chances to create some things that can have impact on the world around us, even if the world around us is just our household, right? And so trying to talk to creative people to say, listen, it's being engaged consistently. It's showing up again and again because there's something that happens with consistency that doesn't happen otherwise. And if you wait for the muse, if you wait for inspiration, if you try to wait for your schedule to align, like all those things don't typically happen. And so you end up going a really long time. And then every once in a while, you'll wake up with this like longing inside to go, oh, I used to do this thing and I really liked it, but it's been a while. Maybe I can figure out some time soon to do that again. And it's kind of this reminiscing nostalgia type thing. And I'm like, it doesn't have to be that way. Matter of fact, it shouldn't be that way, I don't think. I think it should be part of our daily expression and part of our daily selves, because then it helps us show up more complete as a person,
Yeah, that's great. I do like the point that you mentioned as well about being transparent and showing your whole journey. And I feel that's something that people struggle with because they feel, okay, well, I have to appear perfect. I have to show all this success to everyone, or maybe they won't trust me. But the reality is that they can understand where you're at now, and they understand that there's something they can learn from you. And by seeing the whole progression, that's actually so much more valuable, even if there's things that are not perfect, even if you're admitting when there was things you didn't understand, because that's what's relatable. And that's what can oftentimes, even just that part itself, not even teaching the person, can help open up some doors for them to realize, oh, you know what? I was at this kind of place too, but now I understand how I can move forward to that next stage.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And, I also talk a lot about even my own mental health struggles, and just exactly because of that. And I think, especially in today's climate, we're inundated with a lot of mental health struggles and people feeling very alone. And then also you push into that further for creative people who are professional creatives. When you have to show up and creativity is your livelihood, but you're also struggling with mental health issues, that's very difficult to navigate those waters, because it's not like you can just separate one from the other. And sometimes I think people feel very alone in that and going like, I don't even think I can talk about this because I'm afraid of either being fired or being looked at like I can't produce and be as creative as I once was. And where does that leave me? It leaves me feeling trapped, which then further perpetuates the cycle. And so I think talking about these things, giving some voice to these things and helping people feel a little seen and heard in these things is really important, because I think together we can come and say, yes, this is our experience, but let's work together to lead out of this,
Yeah. So yeah, you also run this online community, and that's kind of where that comes in, right? You have the community called the Daily Creative Habit, and it's designed for people to kind of more consistently grow their creative practice. So in our software, actually, we recently launched a brand new, like, updated version of our community feature. So like we understand the importance of creating a community. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Daily Creative Habit and how this helps your customers and your business?
Yeah. So Daily Creative Habit, again, it really comes out of my own journey, and it's trying to identify some key steps for people in their own creative process and journey. And the Facebook group in particular, that's the community, gives people a place to show up. And I encourage people all the time, post what you're working on, even if it's a work in progress. Share what it is that you're doing, what you have done, what you're proud of, where you're stuck. And don't just be someone who takes from the group, but be someone who shows up for other people too. Encourage others to show up. And it's amazing to see what happens when you give people a place to do that, how they will rise to that occasion and say, there are people who are cheerleading and encouraging way more than I ever could as part of the community. And it happens organically, and it's wonderful. And along with that, I'm also giving some prompts. I'm giving some things that are happening in real time with me. And so if I'm encountering a certain situation in my creativity or in my business, I'm trying to share that with the community and say, listen, here's what's happening. And here's what I'm dealing with personally. I'm not coming from this place of like, I'm up here and you're down here, but like, we're in this together. And if there's something that you can learn from my journey, even in real time, then there's something that happens where there's this redemptive moment in it. And it's almost worth going through whatever trials and tribulations, because I know that it's not only useful for me in learning, but it's useful for somebody else. And so that provides this community there. And along with that, I'm also providing tools and resources and tips along the way that I come in contact with or that I've used myself, because I know that people have a lot of questions, especially if they're starting something new and they're like, I don't know anything about print on demand. Where are the places you can go? Or I want to design an online course. Where do I go to actually even begin to think about that? What's the equipment that I need? What's the process? Like those kind of things. I'm very open-handed, and then also invite other people into the mix and say, well, if it's not my experience, then maybe there's somebody else in the group who can sound off on that and give some experience and insight. And then along with that, I've started the Daily Creative Habit email newsletter, which comes twice a week, Mondays right now and Fridays, which gives daily prompts that are kind of what I call creative agnostic. And so it doesn't matter what your creative expression is, just something designed to help get creative juices flowing and spark some ideas and maybe get you to try something that you would never try. I'm also sharing there some insights and some thoughts from my own journey. And then connecting people with resources and companies who provide either tools or services that can help creative people show up and do what it is that they need to do. And so my hope is that over time, this will just continue to grow and be a great resource for people to remind them to show up, remind them to engage with the process, and then give them practical things along the way to help them take steps.
Awesome. So for those who are out there who want to kind of build their own community, like what you're doing, can you share some tips that helped you grow this community?
I think for me, and again, this isn't necessarily, I think, a formula, but for me, I know I needed to show up how I'm wired and what's authentic to me. And so what's authentic to me is stepping into vulnerability, stepping into letting people be seen and heard, wanting to elevate people with me as I build a platform, not simply, hey, I've built this thing, would you come and be the people who then fill up the stadium and I'm on the stage? I want to pull people up on stage with. I want this to be more of an organic type thing, because I think the more interested you can be in other people, the more successful you will be in building community, because then it's not just all about you, right? People may love you and care about you, but they don't really care about you to that degree, right? And as long as you can help them in what it is that they do, then people are going to see the value. Then they're going to want to come around. And so giving places where people can be a part of something deeper, sometimes allowing them into the process as you're building something can be one of the best things, even though it's scary, because you're like, what if this flops? What if they see behind the curtain and you're like, don't look over there. There's a mess in the corner. We haven't dealt with that yet, because again, we all have this idea that we should be showing up and everything should be perfect and buttoned up and very professional, right? But I think especially in creativity, we need to embrace the mess even more so, because it's sometimes out of that mess that the great stuff emerges. And when people see that, and they have a front row to see the process happen, that can actually encourage them to do the same thing in their own journeys and stories. So I would say be open-handed, invite people into it, be vulnerable where you can, and where it's, don't bleed on anybody, right? Don't, if you're going through something really traumatic, pick the people around you who you share certain things with, but at the same time, be vulnerable where you can to show that you're a real person. And show that you're relatable, and that hopefully it sees, other people see that and they feel seen and heard in the process.
Cool. I like the point about figuring out what works for you specifically as a creator, because some people hear like, oh, well, I should do an online course, or I should have a coaching program, or I should have a mastermind, or this is whatever people are saying that I should do. But in your case, the community is more of the focus than your course, right?
Yeah, and it's that was an evolution, right? So I think I started like everybody else, where you're asking the questions of what's everybody else doing? What's happening in the marketplace right now that seems to be the trend? Oh, everybody's blogging, I should blog. Oh, everybody's on social media, a certain one, I should be on the social media. Courses, I should have a course. It's easy to be chasing that stuff, but I think on the one end, you have to be doing something. And so pick something and drill down into it and figure out if that's the right thing to do or not. Even if it's not the right thing, even if it's something that you end up abandoning, you still learn something in the process. And hopefully you can apply what you've learned to the next iteration. That's where I think being creative and entrepreneurial, the whole thing of having to pivot and learning to be comfortable with that, of coming up with this idea, trying to execute it, getting in there, and then figuring out, okay, this isn't working. Why isn't it working? How can I make it work if there's a problem? Or is this simply a bridge to something else? And if it's a bridge to something else, be open-handed enough where you're not trying to just drill this thing to death, but that you allow it to be the bridge that it's supposed to be for you to move on to that next thing. So are courses good for you? I don't know. Maybe only you can answer that. And you can only answer that if you try, right? And so do your research, figure out what other people have done and contextualize it to your own thing, and then take a stab at it. And if you need to pivot, then you pivot, right? I think that's the way that we just continue to show up. And as everything around us evolves, we need to keep evolving as well.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so I think that's a good point. So anyone out there who's thinking like, oh, I have to start the course, or I have to start a coaching, or whatever it is, really all the models work. So I like your point that just try something, figure out for yourself, like, does this fit what I want to do? And if it doesn't, you can slightly adjust that. So in your case, the community idea is really what you enjoy and where you feel you can be the best value for everyone. And so I think that's great. Yeah. So my next question for you is, when we have guests on the show, we like to have every guest ask a question to the audience. So if you could ask our audience anything, what would that be?
I would challenge the listener right now to think about that project or that thing that they want to create. Maybe they've been fantasizing about it for a long time, and yet you haven't done anything about that. To just create a little space and ask yourself why. Like, what's holding you back from creating that thing that you really truly want to create? What's the fear there? And once you start to identify what some of those things are, identify one small step that you can move towards that today, and then another tomorrow. Because most of the time, those things that we feel like we're terrified to do, they're most important for us to do because they're connected to us as a person and our passions. And B, like, when we start to do that, we realize it's actually more attainable than we thought. So ask yourself those questions. Be curious about that thing that you really, truly want to do. Why is it important to you? How can you start to move closer to that?
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great question. So Mike, that's all the questions I have for you today. But if people want to learn more about you, about your newsletter, about your community, where can they find you online?
Yeah, so my main website is mikebrennan.me, M-E. From there, it's kind of a hub for all the other things that I do. Specifically for Daily Creative Habit, if you would like to receive that free email newsletter, you can go to dailycreativehabit.com. And also on there is the link to join the free Facebook group. And so I'd love to have you a part of that and see what it is that you're creating. I'm at Mike Bone on Instagram, where I'm very active as well. And I'm always looking to connect with fellow creative people. So be sure to stop in and say hi.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Mike.
Absolutely. My pleasure.